Gemini, and that's probably enough. Hi, I'm Gemini Brett of morethan.astrology.com and Arts of the Chart, and it's a total honor to be here on EA Zoom videos. These meetings have been so cool. I wish I could keep up with them. Amazing special topics, and there's like, feels like there's 100 of them a day. So at some point, I'm just going to go on a Zoom video marathon, but I'm really happy to be adding to the mix right now. And I'll be adding another one in September, it sounds like, and that one will be about sacred astronomy. And just want to add that, you know, my path, I started pretty recently in 2012, and I started with the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And there's a really strong emphasis on the sky. But I never really studied cosmology or the sky with them. Just having that from that teacher, Daniel Gemario, as a focus really brought me out to the sky to learn astrology through experience and sentience. And that's what I teach. I also teach the old sciences of the quadrivium, sacred geometry, which is number in space, and musical harmony, number in time, and astronomy, which is number in space and time, and number, which is nature. Kind of as prerequisites to come into astrology. So we're not just doing it as language, vocabulary, rules, memorization, equations. It's kind of like connecting to the proofs first is what I'm coming to more and more. And sometimes I wonder, I have a Taurus South Node in the 12th house. And I'm finding myself to be like a materialist astrologer, which has nothing to do with money at all. But rather that I really want there to be a physical happening for this as above, so below, or the as below, so above, as Hermes said first. And so I'm kind of on this quest to connect astrology and astronomy again in my own path, and to study with nature. So I wanted to start off by actually reading a little bit of something that was written long ago by a man named Thomas Burgoyne, and The Light of Egypt, or The Sacred Science of the Soul and the Stars, Volume 2. And he says, astrology per se is a combination of two sciences, astronomy and correspondences. These two are related to each other as hand and glove. The former deals with suns, moons, planets, and stars, and strictly confines its researches to a knowledge of their size, distance, and motion, while the latter deals with the spiritual and physical influences of the same bodies, first upon each other, then upon the earth, and lastly upon the organism of human. Astronomy is the external lifeless glove. Correspondences the living hand within. And I'm using that as a quote to begin a chapter that I'm writing for Organization of Professional Astrology about the importance of astronomy for astrologers. So I go on to say that most of us come to astrology to understand more about the living hand, for the arts of the chart open wide windows of knowing, growing, feeling, and healing. But without the glove, the hand grows cold in the dark of night. Imagine Neil Armstrong and Michael Jackson walking the moon without their gloves. One surely would have died, and perhaps the other would not have helped us feel so alive. In our astrological quest, we often spend so much time gazing down at charts to investigate the soul and heart that we forget to raise our eyes towards the spirit of the living sky. Moon is more than a crescent drawn on a piece of paper. Her phase more than an angle measured from the dotted circle that represents sun. When we walk in the moonlight and witness the ever-changing relationship between the luminaries and the perfection of her reflection, we open ourselves to receiving experiential understanding, the likes of which cannot be written in a book. All right, so I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to dive into joy and sorrows. Close a few things here. And I'm going to close my video. I understand everyone's in charge of their own video screen. You can play with the things up there and see how you can make them big and small and see many of us or no one at all, because these slides take up most of the screen. Do what you will. And Linda, if I can hear you, can you see the dragon here?
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. So astronomy, the glove, correspondences, which we've come to call astrology, the living hand. And I often like to say that mythology, the story of the stars, is the blood that pumps through that hand's veins. This is my favorite eclipse story. Yeah, this is the churning of the milk ocean to achieve immortality. The devas, the forces of light, and the asuras, the forces of shadow, one on each side, pulling the great serpent Vasuki to turn Mount Manara and churn the milk ocean to achieve the Amrita, the elixir of immortality. And it worked. And then Vishnu took the form of Mohini, this beautiful enchantress, so he could confuse the asuras so they would not notice that he was pouring the Amrit, the elixir of immortality, for the devas, but pouring some substitute for the asuras. However, one of those asuras followed his heart to this light sitting on the other side, and he sat amongst the devas, and he sipped, his cup was filled, and he sipped of this immortal elixir. And just in his neighbors, one Surya, the sun, and the other Chandra, the moon, notice that this one between them, Rahu, the asura, was not like them. So they ratted him out to Mohini. And Mohini turned and threw a divine discus, a chakra that decapitated Rahu, severing his head from his body. But he had already drank of the immortal elixir, the Amrita. So now there are two immortal pieces of this asura who are known as Rahu and Ketu, the head of the serpent and the serpent's tail. And a solar eclipse, we are told, is Rahu's revenge, because Surya and Chandra, his neighbors, the sun and the moon, who told on him and got his head cut off, he's out to get them. And every now and then, him chasing them around the heavens, he catches up. So a solar eclipse, as we are about to witness rather soon here in the States, is Rahu eating the sun. But fortunately, because he's been decapitated, it soon thereafter just comes back to us out of the back of his head. This story is amazing and just full of incredible symbolism. And I told it at length recently in a go live for the Cosmic Intelligence Agency, which you can find on their Facebook page. The link is there. And it's also playing right now on Lucid Vibe Radio, where I've got a weekly show, this kind of free internet radio station that just started this week, and I'm doing a Thursday show. So I use that same story that's playing actually as I speak. So you can check that out if you want to hear. And I kind of get into a lot of the symbols and bring them into what does this mean about eclipses and how we can personally practice with them. See, the scientists who see just these kind of fairy tales and the myths have lost so much of the truth and beauty that they embed, the great mysteries. I mean, think about the forces of shadow on one side and the forces on light on the other, turning this axis that churns the oceans of what? Of Gaia, right? So we're talking about the axis and the shadow and the light. And of course, on the shadow side, night, we can witness a lunar eclipse. And on the light side, day, we could witness a solar eclipse. These great events that involve not only these two heavenly bodies of moon and sun, but a third, Earth. Yeah? Circle of spirit, crescent of soul, and the cross of matter. And all of the planets that we use, at least the traditional planets, their glyphs in modern days, are made of these three elements alone: spirit, soul, and matter. That's not the case for these nodes. What are they? You know, I've heard them taught as the headphones and the upside down headphones, or the horseshoe and the upside down horseshoe, but it's actually the south node that's right side up, for that is the marking on the back of the king cobra's head. Yeah, why? Because like a serpent, the moon snakes about the path of the sun from Earth's point of view every month. Where? At the nodes. And when we speak nodes, I like to study with Professor Pluto. I mean, perhaps especially when I'm speaking with an evolutionary astrology group, can get into the nodes and get into Pluto. Pluto is such a profound teacher of what nodes are because his orbit is so oblique. Yeah, this is Pluto's orbit on the outside there. And it's one of the reasons why the whitecoats, why the astronomers demoted him to dwarf planet status, is because his orbit is so far from the ecliptic plane. Pluto's not now because he's about to cross his node. What is the ecliptic plane? We've got to go a little closer in, third rock from the sun, and check out the Earth. So Earth's plane of orbit about the sun is the ecliptic. If we extend it towards infinity, we encounter the zodiacal constellations. So from Earth's point of view, the sun always rests in a zodiacal constellation. And from sun's point of view, the Earth does. This is not so for the other planets. They're not all fixed to the same Earth-Sun plane, the ecliptic. You can see Mercury's orbit in there, kind of tilted. But for the most part, the planets are on a relatively level plane. For the most part, our solar system's like a plate. And this is why Pluto's orbit is so funky. This is true for Eris and Sedna and Makemake, Haumea, these other planets out there as well. So Pluto teaches the nodes so well because the moon is not the only body that has planetary nodes, right? All of the planets do. And we know Jeffrey Wolf Green spoke about the planetary nodes, so did Rujar. Mark Jones is speaking about them a lot now, which I love because they're really intriguing astronomical happenings, and therefore they have correspondence, right? Spiritual energy. So I'm moving Pluto around here to show you that very soon in a theater called You, Pluto will be descending from above the ecliptic, as it's usually called in convention, northern latitude to southern. Back in 8081, Pluto was at his northern bending. That's this place up there, as far from the ecliptic plane as possible. Yeah, at the time too, Pluto's orbit was closer to the sun than Neptune's. But this is Pluto at maximum northern latitude. Pluto has about a 250-year orbit. So during the course of this strange, oblique, eccentric orbit, Pluto, the shamanic hand of the hidden wake-up, will come down, cross from above to below or north to south, and then later peak down here below at his southern bending. Yeah, and later, much later in the orbit, coming back up at the north node. Yeah, we used to call this the ascending node, but this is the north node. And then later at the northern bending. So northern bending, south node, southern bending, north node, or dragon's back, dragon's tail, dragon's belly, dragon's head. And of course, Pluto is not the only planet with nodes. They're just so extreme that they're very easy to look at. This is a very fun program to play with, by the way, Solar System Scope. And these nodes are what allow the dragon to eat the sun, as it was said in some of the Chinese mythos. This strange double dragon that seems to eat its own tail. And Rahu and Ketu. So this is an image that I did not create. And thank you, by the way, to many artists who have contributed to this presentation, many without their knowing. Thank you very much. If you catch up with me, I hope you'll be willing to trade some astrology. Rahu and Ketu. So here's kind of a geocentric or heliocentric image of Earth orbiting the sun and the moon, which is not fixed to the same plane of Earth about the sun. The moon does not orbit on the ecliptic. So every month the moon crosses below and above. If we look at this from a geocentric image, it's a little bit easier. Yeah, from Earth's point of view, moon's path and sun's path are not on the same plane, right? And the places where those planes cross are the nodes. Rahu, the north node, and Ketu, the south node. So every month the moon hits its ascending node in crossing from southern latitudes to northern latitudes, crossing the plane of the ecliptic, crossing the path of the sun, and about a week later peaks out above at the northern bending. And a week later, dragon's tail, south node, coming back down to its depths below. About a week later, she finds her way to the southern bending. Just like this, every month, right? Snaking about the path of the sun, spirit, as seen from Earth, matter, we see this great soul happening. And that's why this Pisces new moon in February, we know, was a total solar eclipse, February 26th. Why? Because it was at the south node, at the dragon's tail. And therefore, we see moon at new moon just between sun from our point of view, an eclipse. Same thing coming soon, August 21st, Dragon's Head, new moon, Dragon's Head, total solar eclipse. Yeah, moon between Earth and sun. But if we look at any other new moon of the year, this is the one that would be most extreme, May 25th, 2017, this new moon is not an eclipse. Why? I mean, moon and sun are in the same degree of the zodiac, right? They're the same in what we call longitude, but very different in latitude. Why? Because they're at the bendings. They're square the nodes, right? So this, I know, in Jeffrey Wolf Green's language, brings about the idea of skip steps. But from an astronomical point of view, what is happening is this. Notice that the moon is ahead of the south node, not yet to the north node. Yeah, the south node is where the moon travels southern latitudes from northern hemisphere's point of view below the path of the sun. And it hasn't gotten to the place where it crosses back above the north node. So where it is here squaring the nodes, it's at its maximum southern latitude, the southern bending, the dragon's belly. And this is what it looks like in the sky. Notice how low moon is below the sun. That red curve is the ecliptic. Yeah. So from our point of view, no eclipse for you. All we see is the sun because the moon is far too low, right, to obscure the light from our view. Gemini was this southern bending new moon this year. I feel that the southern bendings or the northern bendings, these times, the new moon between the two solar eclipses of the year, as I've researched this and looked into some strange historical happenings and watched some experiences with friends, it's like the time when the energy of the previous eclipse, in this case, February 26th, like shakes hands with the coming eclipse, in this case, August 21st. It's like those energies combined. So though this is the furthest thing possible from an eclipse, it's almost like an eclipse. I feel like it's when the previous eclipse is kind of giving its energy over to the new one. And so we, in a sense, begin opening up to the new one. And so what I mean by that as well is that this eclipse that comes our way in August, it's like the energy has been alive since late May. And I wonder if you felt that to be true. So Gemini in the Northern Hemisphere is a very high altitude sign, one of the highest, right? Gemini and Cancer. So it's interesting to see a Gemini moon at the southern bending because it's like a high sign, Gemini, but down to earth in a sense. It's opposite in the southern hemisphere. This is an image from Stellarium, a really wonderful free astronomy program. You can download it, stellarium.org, like stellar and planetarium combined. And this is cast for the same date, but from Melbourne, Australia. And what you see is that the moon's actually above the path of the sun, right? But in Australia, Gemini is a very low altitude sign, and this is a high version of that. So it's interesting to me that, you know, obviously seasons work backwards from northern and southern hemisphere, but so do these nodes. It's the ascending node in the northern hemisphere, which is the north node, is the descending node in the southern hemisphere. And I think that's something really worthy of our investigation, right? This is nature. So what does that mean? Right? It's fun to look at these constellation pictures and see Orion, from my point of view, from my experience in the northern hemisphere, being upside down. I'm really excited to be out in Australia this October for a Cosmic Intelligence Agency retreat. And, you know, when I think of the nodes, which is from Earth's point of view, where the moon and the sun come together, right? Earth has nodes too, like the Earth-Sun relationship has nodes too, and they're called the equinox points. I mean, just look at these two pictures side by side. So I don't know if you see my mouse now, but moon crossing from southern latitudes to northern latitudes at the ascending node, peaking out, northern bending, south node, southern bending. Yeah, this is from a northern hemisphere point of view. So is this, right? It's like sun comes from the below to the above at spring equinox, and then the northern bending with like summer solstice, and the south node or the dragon's tail would be like autumn equinox, and the southern bending like winter solstice. Yeah. So, I mean, this is reversed between north and south hemispheres. This in a way should be too. Does that mean that the correspondences should be reversed? That's not what I'm saying, but I think it's a really important mystery for us to play with a bit. I don't know if maybe we want to watch this movie. You don't need an eclipse to know where the nodes are. I used to teach them as like imaginary points in space. So here's that Gemini new moon of May 25th. Yeah, moon below the sun, pretty closely aligned to Aldebaran is that star there in the Pleiades. My screen is flashing funky. You're probably seeing that too. This won't last too long. That's the moon at its north node, crossing from below to above, or crossing from southern latitudes to northern latitudes. About a week later, it's going to peak out at the northern bending. Yeah. Nodes now, Leo Aquarius, so the bendings are square the nodes in Scorpio Taurus. That's the south node, moon coming back from the above to below. And I used to teach these as imaginary points in space. But now that I've come to know the stars that the ecliptic runs through, and I can see them, and I can see moon's relationship to them, like there, for example, though I wouldn't see it because the sun's so close, I would know that the moon is really low below the ecliptic. And so the nodes are not just like imaginary things, right? They are nature, and we can learn to see them with our face. And they're so important, right? Because they are where the energy of the moon and the energy of the sun are consistently one. And of course, the moon and sun are not always at the moon's nodes. They only meet at the moon's nodes at the time of solar eclipses or lunar eclipses, right? Full moon near the nodes, lunar eclipse, new moon near the nodes, solar eclipse, right? But in a sense, you know, that's like astrology like particle. Where are they now? Where can I measure them? Astrology like wave, a little bit more mysterious, you know? One like time and one more like space maybe. In a sense, there's always these places in the heavens, these nodes where the moon and the sun energy are one. And in my own quest, especially in geometry, I've come to find that sun is spirit. And by that, I mean the all, the indivisible, the one. And that moon is the reflection of that, its soul. And I don't want to get into that trip too much right now, but it'd be a fun place to go at some point. Anyway, these nodes, you know, we know it's path of soul, path of fate, many different ways to pet the cosmic cat, many different paradigms play with them in different ways. But this, you know, just from a very natural standpoint and something that we can actually observe, it's a very real and a very magical and a very important thing. And just think about how amazing then, you know, a solar eclipse is, when we can see the so-called sun king and moon queen in this sacred marriage, in this sacred union. You know, she's pointing to a rooster, but I wonder if there's another name for that being. And, you know, there's this old transmission that like the priest said, do not go watch an eclipse, stay inside. There's some tribes here in America, you know, before it was called that, who say the same thing. This is not a good idea to go watch an eclipse. I've heard it suggested it's because they understood that it was bad for your eyes and they wanted to protect the eyes of the tribe. Yeah, I kind of wonder if they're trying to protect their own like priestly knowledge by not allowing everybody to see this sacred happening. What if we understand more about all that is just by seeing this engagement of moon and sun, of queen and king, they say, but I would say of soul and spirit. And so nodes now in Leo Aquarius. Yeah, South Node Aquarius, May 9th, 2017 till November 6th, 2018. And so we are in this time, very much like the Sphinx, right? I mean, lion body, angel face, very feminine face if you look closely. And the Sphinx stares due east, very much a processional marker, looking perhaps for this dawning of the age of Aquarius, that when the water bearer rises due east, the lion will be setting due west, you know, one in front and the other behind. I just had a really fun conversation with Maurice Fernandez about this nodal axis and a little bit about the eclipses, and trying to think where you could find it. Oh, it's up on my SoundCloud. So at morethan-astrology.com, you can just scroll down and see links to the StarryTelling podcast. All right, so here we go. August 21st, 2017, total solar eclipse, the very last degrees of Leo, and at the star, it was said, that rules them all, Regulus, the heart of the lion, which in late 2011 precessed into the tropical sign of Virgo, or really Virgo precessed to Regulus. And I think that's a story for another time. I think we'll have some opportunity maybe to share with one another at the end. We can go there if you want. I've been speaking a lot about the eclipse, and at morethan-astrology.com too. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see an eclipse event that I'm co-hosting in Idaho, and there's a bunch of links to different interviews with Astrology Hub and Bridging Realities podcast and some fun things. So the zodiacal period of the lunar nodes is 18.5 years. I'm still trying to catch up with why and how the nodes themselves, the lunar nodes themselves, move through the zodiacal degrees. They spend about 1.5 years in every sign, and 18.5 years for the whole trip. But one thing I can say is that's such a trip because, you know, in the tarot, just on one side of 18.6 is 18, the card of the moon, and on the other 19, the card of the sun. So the creator of the cards, which predate this deck that we're looking at here, Rider-Waite, know about this 18.5 year dance of the lunar nodes. And did they maybe know about these eclipse cycles? One of 18 years, well, 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, and one of 19 years, exactly, the Metonic cycle. There's a lot of calendars throughout time that have tried to sort out this strange relationship between sun, our tropical year, and lunations. We hear this a lot today that, you know, we just need to get back to the 13 moon calendar and 13 months of 28 days. And it's like, first of all, that's not a year. Secondly, the moon doesn't do anything in 28 days. You know, despite the manufacturers of birth control pills, 29.5 days is new moon to new moon. 29.53 days is the moon sidereal or synodic cycle, meeting moon, sun, new moon to new moon. About 27.3 days is the sidereal cycle, moon aligning to the same star that it did a cycle before. So you can average those and get close to 28, but that doesn't mean the moon does anything in 28. It takes 19 years for new moon to new moon, the moon's lunation cycle, right, which is moon and sun, new moon to new moon. The solilunar cycle, lunisolar cycle it's been called. It takes 19 solar years for that cycle to align with our tropical year, our sun cycle, right? So 19 solar years is 235 lunations, almost exactly. It's called the Metonic cycle, named after this Greek cat named Meton, though it was known about well before him. So here's just an example. This was a couple days ago, August 8th, and we see a Pisces moon and a Leo sun. Now, we know the moon's going to return to Pisces every month. In fact, it's going to get to that exact same degree of Pisces, a lunar return, right? Every 27.3 days on average. And every month, on average, every 29.5 days, we're going to have moon in the same phase of the sun, right? This is what, the day after full moon, which in this case was a lunar eclipse. So this is basically full moon moving towards disseminating moon, right? So every month moon return by sign, every month moon return by phase, but only every 19 years moon return by sign and phase simultaneously. So 2017, 19 years from now in 2036, we'll have this Leo sun and a Pisces moon on the same date. The same thing in 2055, 19 years from then, 2074. We could go on and on like that. Now, if you're about to turn 19 or 38, right, or any of these 19s, 57, go be with the moon on your solar turn, because it's going to be the same shape in the same sign, and just breathe that thing in. I was very fortunate to find out about this just before I turned 38. And this is true then for solar eclipses too, right? So this solar eclipse that comes our way August 21st, 1998 is a repetition in a sense, this degree of Leo of an eclipse that happened around the same date. It can get off by one because of the whole strange leap year thing. And 1979, 1998, 2017 this year, 2036, these are all these are all solar eclipses in these same degrees of Leo. They're not all total solar eclipses. this is what the entire chart looks like for all of them. I know that's hard to see, the screen is small, but even from this size, you can probably tell that none of the other planets are doing the same thing, right? Wheels within wheels. Jupiter has an 11.88 year cycle, Saturn a 29.5 year cycle, right? So it's the moon sun that does 19, the Metonic cycle. All right. And the nodes do not do 19 years, right? The nodes do 18.6 years. So notice that from 1979 to 1998 to 2017 to 2036, how the moon sun are meeting in the same degree of the zodiac, but the nodes slipping, all right? And a new moon has to be within about 13 degrees of the nodes for us to experience an eclipse. The closer, the more total, right? So this year, August 21st, 2017, very close to the nodes, total solar eclipse. In 2036, that eclipse will not be total. You can see the nodes about 12 degrees from the new moon at that point, so not a total eclipse. And by the time we get to 2055, it's not an eclipse at all, because the node now has slipped too far from the new moon for us to experience an eclipse. It's just a new moon, right? They're not meeting at the crossing points, which are the nodes, Rahu, Ketu. All right. So these Metonic strings of eclipses, as I've come to call them, they can either happen in a series of 4, which is the case for the coming eclipse. It's the third in a Metonic string of 4, or they can be in 5. They can't do 2, they can't do 3, they do 4 or 5, which is a pretty interesting thing. And they happen in the same degree. So what happened in 1998, August 21st, right? A Regulus solar eclipse. It was an annular solar eclipse. And it aligned very strongly to the son of then President Bill Clinton, okay? 4 days before this, he admitted publicly that he had had inappropriate relations with Monica Lewinsky, and then he was impeached. And the following eclipse in Aquarius, February of 1999, Clinton was acquitted. That eclipse being just opposite his sun. Because we have these eclipses in a way in complements. They have to be near the nodes move slowly, right? So when the nodes are Leo, Aquarius, as they are now, as they were then, for the most part, we're going to have our eclipses, which have to be near the nodes in Leo, Aquarius. Now, they only have to be within 13 degrees of the nodes for a solar eclipse, 17 degrees for a solar eclipse, 13 degrees for a lunar eclipse. So they could be in neighboring signs as well. That wasn't the case in 99. And 4 days after this, Clinton was acquitted by Senate. Pretty amazing. So the eclipse had his son impeached, the eclipse opposite his son acquitted. Do we have some of this energy of impeachment now on a Metonic return? 1979, 1998, this year, 2017, when we know this total solar eclipse, which is coming to the United States, is going to be aligned to President Donald Trump's Mars and also his ascendant. Ascendant, we have a pretty good birth time for Trump, it is said, but certainly Mars is right there. And then next February 15, 2018, there will be the eclipse near his descendant and pretty strongly, as you can see, configured to his Mars. I mean, what's that? 25 degrees away, I think. 21. So, I mean, that's something else. And so let's just say whatever's going down, it's not going to happen maybe on August 21st. Maybe it already has. Maybe it's still happening because wheels within wheels, right? It's a beautiful thing about astrology. It lives, it breathes. It's not just one moment. It's all moments, yeah. I mean, and it might have already happened because Regulus rising Trump won this election actually during the new moon at the northern bending in November of 2016 in a very mysterious and kind of eclipsy way. In fact, a lot of the headlines said that he eclipsed his competition. Check that out. So the strength card, right? The lion card, 8. Why? Because I'm wondering if this eclipse at Donald Trump's ascendant might be more strong than the one that was at Bill Clinton's sun. Now, eclipses aren't about ascendants. They're about suns and moons, right? But why I wonder this is because this 1998 eclipse at Bill Clinton's sun, here was its path. It was an annular solar eclipse, which is like a total solar eclipse, but the moon is a bit further from the earth at that time. And so the body of the moon is not enough to eclipse the entire sun. We have a ring of fire, as it's called, around the moon's body in an annular eclipse. They're really cool to look at, but the light doesn't go out. So over at the host of our Zoom meeting today down there in Australia, above Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and annular, whereas as we know, this eclipse that's coming up that's aligned to Trump's Mars ascendant is limited actually in its path of totality to the United States, coast to coast or sea to shining sea, and it is a total solar eclipse. So what does this mean for this lion? We have to wonder. And how much do these paths matter? All right, some say not at all, right? Does this path matter? Now, this is a really cool thing. We measure eclipses and everything astrology, not from the surface of the earth where we can see them. We measure eclipses from the center of the earth. We measure all things astrology from the center of the earth. I used to bring people out to witness eclipses and was just tripping on why I was like 20 to 50 minutes off the timing, because I was getting my time from the astrology chart, which is geocentric center of Earth. If you've looked at the difference between geocentric center and topocentric surface, you've noticed that not much changes, basically just the moon. But if somebody has a moon at the end or the beginning of a sign, it can actually shift into the other when you go back and forth. But see, I love this. When I first looked at that, I was like, well, that's wrong, because here I am on the surface of Earth. But I love this in that Light of Egypt reading. At the beginning here, Orgon says what? The planets like play with one another, and then with Earth, and then with human. But I would say with one another, then with Earth, and then she with us, radiating out from her core. That's the one place where we are all connected. If we all hold our hands to the heavens right now, we're all on different places of the Earth. And contrary to some strange conspiracy beliefs these days, the Earth is not flat, yeah? And above us is moving all the time. You know, it's the unique, the different, the ever-changing. It's through our roots, through our feet, into the heart of Gaia, where we are all connected. So it's a beautiful thing to me that that's where we measure the significance of the astronomical alignments to find our way to the correspondence side of astrology. So this is a really wonderful book, heady, you know, but Bill Meridian, The Predictive Power of Eclipse Path. It's awesome. And he studied with Charles Jane, who studied with Jandro, like these kind of eclipse masters. Bill Meridian just did a webinar for Cosmic Intelligence Agency that you can find your way to over there. It's really, really good. But he makes some really cool arguments for eclipse path for natives. All right, so here's his teacher and his teacher's teacher. And here's Douglas MacArthur and his counterpart, Hideki Toho, who led navies in World War. On the left is Douglas MacArthur's prenatal solar eclipse shadow path. You can see here from the United States through the Pacific, close to Hawaii, and it's on its way over to Japan. All right. For Tojo, it's actually his postnatal eclipse path, which is an interesting thing because I think a lot of us work with prenatal eclipses and don't look to the postnatal eclipse so often. I was born 10 days before an eclipse. So my prenatal eclipse is like, half a year before my birth, where the postnatal is right there. It's an interesting thing to look at. So for Tojo as well, this eclipse path, if we look at his postnatal, going from Japan to the United States, and these guys led navies battling in those places between those two countries, right? This is Ulysses S. Grant, right? Leader of one side of a civil war, and the prenatal eclipse path cut through his country of birth. Same thing for Chairman Mao, right? Who led us a civil war. I mean, splitting China in half. And so does this mean civil war? Now, first of all, if it was apples to apples, and we compared it to Grant's prenatal solar eclipse path, well, that means that in this time, a future general will be born that leads a civil war. Hopefully that's not the thing. I mean, I feel like we're split apart enough already in this realm. Maybe this is going to bring us together. But it does split the country in half much more strongly than this one does, doesn't it? It's interesting that it was actually the end of the Civil War that had a similar path to the one coming here in 2017. This is 1865, right? So the year of the end of the Civil War in the United States actually split the states in half. So maybe this is about bringing us together, if we could say this one actually did. At least it was the end of a war. All right, so 19 is the Metonic cycle. And notice again that the Metonic moon, 235 lunations, 19 solar years, it's in the same degree of the eclipse. And my argument is that works like transits, right? So two of the great predictive techniques, or I like to say productive techniques that most of we astrologers use today is transits, alignment of current planets to your birth planets, and progressions, a strange technique that I like to say is reminiscent of the fourth trimester of life. So the 19-year, the Metonic cycle, same degree of the zodiac, like a needle point is like a transit, where the 18-year cycle, 18.03 year cycle, 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hour cycle, the Saros cycle, I feel is more like progressions. And we'll see that eclipses don't always have to be negative, right? So you might know this cast of characters, or at least one of them, the one with the bare chest and the sunglasses, is John F. Kennedy, right? This is Patrol Boat 109. And there was a total solar and annular solar eclipse in the South Pacific where Kennedy was the commander of this patrol torpedo boat. And the very night of this eclipse, which led to the Solomon Islands where the boat was patrolling, a Japanese destroyer ran right through the boat, basically split it in half and capsized it. And Kennedy, I mean, the story maybe seems to have become quite a tall tale, but it said that Kennedy not only saved the 10 of the 12 surviving crew, but that one man who was very injured, Kennedy swam 3 miles and towed this man, holding the leash of his life preserver between his teeth, And the story, it said, kind of got larger and larger. But here's where it was. This is a total solar eclipse, or annular solar eclipse, in the sign of Leo, in Kennedy's 10th house. We think we have a pretty good birth time for Kennedy. It has a Rodin rating of A, if you're into that thing. But it's a pretty strong eclipse, right? There we see conjoined Pluto, Jupiter, right? North node eclipse like this one coming up. So 10th house of career, did this contribute to his career? We could say, yeah, because some say that this was the moment that made the president, and that without PT 109, there would have been no President Kennedy. But there was, all right? This is 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours later, that same eclipse family, as we usually refer to the Saros cycles, further in the zodiac, because 11 days will shift it 11 degrees ahead, because the sun on average moves 1 degree per day. So this is 1961 in August 11th. Again, a 10th house eclipse. And where was Kennedy at that time? He was on the cover of Life magazine. And I was joking for a while that he probably picked which photo he had them use from his new office. And then I realized that that wasn't just a joke. Here he is picking out the photo for that magazine cover in an office that we call the Oval Office in the White House, with a gigantic globe. And here's a gigantic globe. And this is an image of this particular Saros cycle, cycle 145. That's coming August 21st, 2017. Last around 18 years ago, 1999, 18 years before that, 81, 18 years before that, 63. And that's when it was last in these same longitudes or time zone. I'll show you why by going to this video. So these cycles, Saros cycles, come around every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. And on average, they go for about 1,280 years. A north node eclipse, as this one is, starts at the North Pole with a very barely partial eclipse, like the shadow of moon barely grazing the earth, okay? And is anyone at the North Pole to see it? But then every 18 years, the new moon, as you can see in the chart here, is approaching the node. The eclipses are becoming more total, and they're wrapping down. In the case of a North Node eclipse that starts at the North Pole, they're wrapping down and around the globe, okay? They'll reach their most total expression, and you'll see the new moon closest to the nodes, actually in, I think, was it 2342 for this particular family, Saros cycle 145. They'll reach their strongest alignment of Earth, Moon, Sun, right? So the closest to the nodes near the equator of the Earth, all right? They're total kind of in the temperate zone, and their most total eclipse will be very close to the Earth's equator. And here it is. You can just see, in a way, snaking, right? So here we have more serpent images around the globe during this strange life. I feel like it's like every 18 years, the beat, you know, of the shadow being 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours, or 18.03 years. All right, and the North Lunar Node eclipse starting at the North Pole will end up at the South Pole. As it does, a new North Node eclipse will be born at the North Pole. And South Node eclipses start at the South Pole and come up. So again, the 11 days, and you can just watch the degrees here, you'll see that every time around it's moving through the decans, right? 5, 16, and then it goes away. The 8 hours takes it a third of the way around the globe, because the globe spins in 24 hours, right? So it takes 3 of these SARs. Actually, that's not necessarily the right term for it, but it takes 3 repetitions of a Saros cycle to come back to the same longitudes, or the same time zones, right? Because 8 hours plus 8 hours plus 8 hours is 24 hours, one spin of the globe, yeah? So the last time this family of eclipses was here in the States, or close to it, 1963. All right, and won't be here again until 2071. This is called the Tri-Saros, 3 of these Saros cycles, 54 years and change, 54 years, 33 days and 24 hours, or 34 days. Many astrologers will look to the first emanition of the Saros cycle to basically speak about what the energetic is going to be for every repetition of the family that comes around every 18 years, on average for 1,280 years. This is the first eclipse, January 4th, 1639, Capricorn, 14th degree. Pretty interesting. I mean, it's right opposite the United States sun that most of us use, the so-called Independence Day chart. Of course, that hadn't happened yet. This was in 1639, the first colonial constitution here in the United States. Some very interesting things happening around the world. But check out this Jupiter-Pluto opposition in Scorpio Taurus. Pretty interesting. And think about how, you know, if we combine this with the coming solar eclipse chart, which is in 28 and change, 28, I think 53 Leo, with the nodes around 24 and change Leo Aquarius, right? And if we put these two charts together, then we have these on the bendings of the coming eclipse. So Saros cycle 145, Bernadette Brady in her wonderful book, Eagle and the Lark, calls it Saros cycle 1. She uses a different astrologer's convention of naming. I wish I could remember his name, and I don't. This is what she has to say. I'm not going to read this. I don't like reading slides anyway. And you could take a screenshot, I guess. I'll give you a second to do that. But why Saros cycle 1 north instead of Saros cycle 145? And why only the first chart of an entire family of these things that have on average 71 repetitions to say everything that we want to know about all of them? I wonder sometimes about when it first reaches totality. The first total solar eclipse of this cycle was 1927. I mean, Great Depression's coming on. This is right between the First and the Second World Wars. This is a very intriguing chart. I know I'm really honored to have amazing clients for consultations. And there's some people I know who've had the full like near-death experience. And I almost feel like this, like when it reaches totality, it's like a whole new life. So I'm interested in this chart. I'm super interested in this as well. The astronomical convention of how eclipses are named. So this Saros cycle 140, is more associated with like the middle eclipse of the family, which is the strongest eclipse of the family. So this is 2342, March 8th. I don't think we need to look ahead to that one. You're probably not going to be in your same monkey suit when this comes our way in centuries from now. But here's where it's aligned to the Solomon Islands through Australia. And this is how it's aligned, you know, in the astronomical map, where we can probably find our way to a deeper sense of correspondences. Pisces much? So what is Pisces, right? I mean, the last sign, and the empath, and the healer, and the compassion, and the mystic, and the poet, and ascension, you know, merging, and the spirit of the waters. And we can say so much about Pisces, but I almost feel like this in a way is like the goal of this eclipse family, like this moment. And so when I started looking at this, it's like, well, how could I prove that? I'm gonna have to do so much research. And what I did is, instead of looking at eclipse families, I looked at people. And this is one of my favorite examples, although they are all pretty profound. Abraham Lincoln. So what the technique was, by the way, is I looked at his birth chart, I looked at his death chart, and then I cast a Davidson chart for the two, which brought me to a chart for the midlife moment of Abraham Lincoln in this case, right? I think it was 7 days after this midlife moment, maybe it was less than that, for the first time he publicly denounced slavery at Illinois Supreme Court. Now, I would argue that what we best know Abraham Lincoln for is emancipation. So there's something about his midlife moment reflecting his devotion to maybe his great work, or at least what we best know him for. And this, to me, I mean, it's not proof, but I feel like it's almost like a little data point. And I did this for John Lennon and Marley and some interesting figures. Kennedy was one of them as well. All some pretty interesting results. So midlife moment, and what about the midlife moment of this coming eclipse cycle, which won't find its way till 2342, but can we find something in this super Pisces chart? And if so, well, what does it take to birth a mystic? You know, what type of initiations are necessary for us to find our way to true compassion and merging? I will ask. And I'm interested in what Saturn and Chiron are doing in this chart, but let's move along. So this is the end of Abraham Lincoln's life. This was April 14th. He was shot in a theater, right, in Washington, D.C. He actually died the next day on the 15th. But look at the sun, pretty close to the nodes, right? And the moon as well. So it wasn't long before this, there was a lunar eclipse. Yeah. This was just 4 days before Lincoln was shot. And this was a lunar eclipse that was visible in North America. And not long before that, on April 25th, sorry, on February, no, where is it? April 25th. So after that, 10 days after he died, there was a solar eclipse right at his south node. Look at that, right? With Saturn at his Mars. This is that eclipse path. You know, it's interesting to me that some of these South American countries were the path of totality here. They were the first of the American countries to free the slaves and get rid of that nonsense of slavery. This is an eclipse that Lincoln would not live to see. October 19th, 1865, he was shot in April and died on the 15th of April. And notice how this eclipse is right at his Mars. And, you know, the 13th Amendment, which ratified, well, which freed slaves, abolitionism, right? I'm lacking the proper word right now, and that's okay. It was put forth in January, but it wasn't signed until around this time right here of this eclipse. And this is the path, right? This is that one that we looked at before that ended the Civil War. Well, look how the path cuts through America, goes through the Deep South, and heads over to Africa and, you know, West Central Africa. So can you imagine how many slave boats actually traveled on that path in the opposite direction? It's a magical thing with eclipse paths. So we measure from the center of the earth, and I like to say just because you don't see it doesn't mean you don't be it, right? This eclipse is for all of us, but there is something about being in the path of totality. So what does that mean for the United States now? You know, there's this ancient omen of the death of the king. Well, now some would consider the sun the king. And doesn't the sun die during a total solar eclipse? at least for a couple minutes, sometimes 7 minutes, the whole process taking, you know, up to 4 or 5 hours sometimes, right? And then it comes back to life. What does that mean? So just let's think about the last time the Saros cycle came to the United States, 1963. How's that relate to the death of the king, right? I chose one of the before images. They're a little bit easier to stomach. This is November 22nd, 1963. And it was a while before then. This, by the way, is the assassination chart, outer wheel transit chart to John F. Kennedy's nativity, with progressions. This is a chart of the solar eclipse that happened before the assassination, well before. It was July 20th, 1963. And many astrologers would suggest this was way too far before November 22nd, to be a participant in that happening. I'm not so sure. And look where it is. I mean, right at the cusp of the 10th house. And again, we have a good birth time for JFK is what it said. We don't know that it's great. But regardless, it's certainly partile conjoined his Saturn, right? And if that's not enough, what do we need? All right. So this is the path of that eclipse. And it was a North Node eclipse. It's this same family that's coming our way, right? Started the North Node back in the 17th century at the North Pole. And since has been sliding down, right? And every third repetition comes to these longitudes. So of course, the last one when it was here, the Tri-Saros ago, 54 years ago, was above the United States. And the next one will be below in 54 years from now. You can see that this just barely cut through a little bit of the United States. So this is on the left, that July 20th eclipse, Saros cycle 145, the same that's coming our way in August. And on the right, the eclipse that Kennedy would not live to see, January 14th, 1964, 24th degree of Capricorn, right at his IC. If we have a good time for him, opposite Saturn. Yeah. This is just between the two, okay? North Node in Cancer, South Node in Capricorn. And notice, by the way, where the nodes are aligned to Kennedy's nativity. In fact, look at the one on the right here that he would not live to see, January 1964, much closer to the assassination, November 63. He's in a nodal reversal, right? North Node is South Node, and vice versa. And not just a nodal reversal, but the day, the exact day of the nodal reversal. Yeah, so sometimes it's these eclipse alignments that are about to happen that might say something for our predictive techniques. Just between those two eclipses of July 63 and January 64 is this Libra new moon, where at the northern bending. Why can I say this is the northern bending? Because it's square the nodes and it's ahead of the North Node, right? So crossing from below to above in northern hemisphere skies, peaking, right? Moon's northern extreme, northern maximum, the northern bending, the dragon's back, not an eclipse at all. But what I'm suggesting is that this is when the previous eclipse that was conjoined Kennedy's Saturn in July of 63, July 20th, and the following eclipse opposite his Saturn at the IC, this to me is when they kind of shake hands, all right? A couple days later, Kennedy gave a speech at the University of Maine. What's significant about that? Here's the date, October 19th, 63. Moon's exact opposite is Mars, all right? And it's in this lunation that began with a seed of a new moon at the northern bending. And he went to Maine, which was the only place in the United States where the path of totality passed through, right? So in a way, what I'm suggesting is that at this time, Kennedy and Maine went to connect very physically with a place of Earth where this shadow had been cast. And in a way, I feel like maybe that connected him to that energy and maybe also participated spiritually with the assassination months later. All right, how about years later? This is 1981. This is the next time, 18 years after 1963, that this same eclipse family came around and Reagan was shot. Right? I mean, they pulled a bullet out of his lung, right? This was March 30th, 1981. And just a month before, February 4th, 81, there was a total solar eclipse exact Reagan's sun. You can see Chiron conjoined his moon at the same time. Some pretty amazing alignments happening here. Now notice also, though, this was February, right? This was not Saros cycle 145. This was Saros cycle 140. But 140 and 145, they've kind of been traveling companions, at least since 1927, when 145 reached its first total eclipse expression. Yeah. So 63, Kennedy shot. 81, Reagan shot. 99, Bill Clinton is impeached and then acquitted, but also JFK Jr. died that year on July 16th, 99. It was not long before August 11th, 99, which was Saros cycle 145, come around for the second time since his father had been shot. And I'm really interested to see that this eclipse featured Saturn and Mars at the lunar bendings, right? So places where we would see skip steps, I guess. And I don't know that I want to get into this now because I'm just looking at the clock and we're kind of moving along. But what I'm going to show in these slides, and you could just take some time with them later, maybe if you review this, but this is Saturn's north lunar node, okay? So Saturn crosses from below to above the ecliptic northern hemisphere point of view in the sign of Cancer. So does Pluto, so does Jupiter. And actually, I would suggest that this is why in the rules Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, because Jupiter likes to go up high and expand things. And I would suggest that Saturn is exalted in Libra, because Libra, if his north node is in Cancer, his south node is in Capricorn, Libra would be the place of his northern bending. So that's where Saturn starts coming back down. Yeah. So it's here, Saturn's in southern latitude and at the southern bending of the moon. And I'm really interested in this because we look at these skip step planets. What about where their latitude, right? Because the moon's path would be down here and Saturn's between the path of moon, soul, and sun spirit. All right. On the other hand, Mars at that time was in southern latitude, right? This is actually below because this is under the ground in this image. And the moon's course would have been northern. This is the northern bending where Mars is. So Saturn in a way was like right in the mix while Mars was on the opposite side of the ecliptic. That might make sense to some of you. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by this too. This is the this is the eclipse that happened before JFK Jr.'s death. And look, it was, I mean, exact his moon and his Chiron. And he was born moon, Chiron, opposite Uranus, right? So the death of a prince who could have been king, maybe. I don't know why. There we go. Here's JFK with Bill Clinton, maybe the year that Clinton was impeached. So 63. This is 81 when it comes to the Kennedys. JFK Jr. turned 21. There was a movie on air about Jacqueline Kennedy. 99, JFK Jr. dies in that strange, mysterious plane crash. And this year, I mean, there was a lot of rumor that Robert Kennedy Jr. was going to come into the Trump administration. But one thing for sure is that Bill Clinton, who actually came into the White House in 81, right, as Reagan's VP, same Eclipse family. Not Bill Clinton, sorry, George Bush Sr. He signed this law, the John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act in 1992 in October, which said that so many years from then, the National Archives would have to release all the suppressed records of JFK's assassination. And that comes to term this year, 2017. The FBI, the CIA can try to keep it suppressed on order of national security, but only Trump can say yes or no. And when's the last time that a president had such a known entanglement and disagreement with the three-letter intelligence organizations, maybe 63, something that many suggest led to Kennedy's death, you know? There's very interesting themes, these interesting themes with the Kennedys. Well, what about Trump in this Saros cycles, these 18-year cycles, okay? Well, in 1999, he ran for president. Didn't get as far as he did this time. Also in 1999, his father, shown on the left here, Frederick Trump, died. And in 1981, the previous Saros cycle, his son, Frederick Trump, or his older brother, this is Trump and his older brother, Freddie, died alcoholic at the age of 43 in 1981. So strange wheels within wheels. I wanted to show this thing. So we have our Saros, 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours, 18.03 years. Metonic, 19 years. And the nodal cycle, 18.6 years, right? So in our first nodal return, I'm just going to use 18.5. It was easier for my mental math. These things are very close. Now, this isn't going to be at 18 years old because your prenatal eclipse could be up to 6 months before your birth, which is the case for me. So this is going to be often when you're 17, not quite 18, right? But let's use 18, 18 and a half for the nodal return, 19 for your metonic return, same phase and sign of the moon on your solar return, okay? Now see how they start distancing, right? So your second nodal return at 37 years old, well, the Saros is at 36, the metonic's at 38. 54, 55 and a half, 57, 72, 74, 76. I said earlier, I don't like to read slides, and here I go. I mean, by the time you turn 108, and I know you will, 3 years separate the Saros return, the nodal return, and the metonic return. And so I think this is something that we should look at, that in a way our nodal returns, which most of us are really looking to, not too many of us are looking to the eclipse family returns, but I think that in a way the nodal return, like the energy extends the window of that opportunity of realigning to the soul path, which seems to be one of the great themes of a nodal return. It's like increasing as we move along. All right. So I'm going to stop share for a second and just check in. I wanted to show a few chart examples. I'm seeing some chat go down, but I'm not going to open it up because I heard it was against the rules. And our time, I think I'm at an hour, and Linda, you said I could keep going for it, so I think I will.
Keep going, yep.
Okay, cool.
Thank you.
Right on, thanks. Well, so thanks for your patience and presence with that. I know it's a ton of information. I know I talk fast. But this is being recorded in these genius EA Zoom videos, so have a look again if you want, pause things, contemplate, and start checking out your eclipse returns. I'm going to show you a really cool website online where you can look at the family of your prenatal solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, whatever it may be, and see every time it comes around. What does that mean? I don't quite know, but I want to. But I'm going to show you a few examples. I got to get out of this thing. And I'll share my screen again. Okay. So Linda, now you should see my desktop, yeah?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. And here's Donald Trump's nativity, right? So Trump himself was born during the moments of a total lunar eclipse, right? Now we know this is the horizon. This thing was happening underground. He was born with the sun well above at about 10 a.m., right? So think about this, you know, I mean, nothing reflects a Gemini sun, and he's got some company up there, better than a Sagittarius full moon. But what if we can't see that moon because it's shadowed by the Earth during a total solar eclipse? And what if it's totally below? I have a client who was born basically in the same moment, but on the other side of the Earth where this thing was visible. She's a very different person than Trump, that is for sure. Anyway, so are people born in eclipse moments more aligned to the potential energetic portals that eclipses offer? Maybe we shall find out. So here's this wonderful site. It's called moonblink.info. And praises to the astronomers who give us so much cool information. So this website, when you come in, you can either just hit /eclipse/search, or down here on the left side, there's a button that says eclipse search, okay? So Trump was born in 1946. And I can just type in 1946 and 1946, and I see every eclipse that year. Many eclipses that year. Why? Because one was January 3rd. And so we get more than the average, which is 2 solar eclipses a year, or at least 2 eclipse cauldrons or seasons a year, right, when the sun's near the nodes. And more this year as well, because it did solar, lunar, solar. So this is this total lunar eclipse that Trump was born during. And Moonblink, sometimes these are broken, but usually it will come up and show you where it was visible. The shaded part, it means it's not visible. This is where the lunar eclipse was seen. As we saw in his chart, it was not visible in the United States, in New York, where Trump was born. So I can see here on this chart as well, Saros cycle, 129. So this would be Lunar Saros 129. That same eclipse belongs to this family. Now it began June 10th, 1351, you know, and then it comes around every 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours. I mean, sometimes I like fascinate these things as possible, like incarnational check-in times and maybe even places, because we can see where in the world they were visible. We can also see that on July 27th, 2018, that same eclipse family, okay, that Trump was born under, 1964, it will be the Tri-Saros, right? Very interesting. So the 54, it's a very powerful thing. I didn't say this in the story earlier, but the Devas, 54 on one side, pulling that snake, and 54 on the other for 108. And the moon on average is 108 moons from the earth, and the sun is 108 suns from the earth, and the sun is 108 earths in diameter, right? This is why eclipses, the moon is 1,080 miles in radius. The atomic weight of silver, long associated with the moon, 108, 108 beads on the mala, 108 names of the divine goddess. We go on and on, 108 double stitches on a baseball. So pretty interesting that it will be next year that we will have this lunar eclipse. This is the SAR return of Trump's, of the eclipse that Trump was born under. Here's the chart for that. All right. Here is the solar eclipse just before. All right, so let me show you this. If we look at Trump's prenatal solar eclipse, this would be May 30th, 1946. And check this out, solar, lunar, solar. It only happens when the lunar is total, super close to the nodes, and therefore, like, let's look at this. Here's this lunar eclipse right at the nodes, right? Almost a degree away. And that means we can have a solar eclipse on one side, but very partial solar eclipse, see how far from the nodes? And a solar eclipse on the other side, but again, very partial. See how far from the nodes, right? Well, let's look at some of these alignments. I mean, especially this one in July 12th, 2018, I mean, right at his Saturn, opposite Pluto, right? I mean, and we saw this eclipse at Kennedy's Saturn in 1963. So I'll just leave that there. I do want to show this, that if you're born in a solar, lunar, solar, that means the one before, it's the North Node eclipse, is just at its end. And the one after is just beginning. And actually, yeah, that's right. So, I mean, they're very partial eclipses, but it's an interesting thing. And this, I think, was true for Kennedy as well. I can just look well, actually, I'm not going to do that because there's other things I want to show. So play with your eclipse cycles up here and see when they started, right? So one more thing I'll do is just like, okay, here's Trump's prenatal solar eclipse. And it's kind of at the end of its life, and you can see where it is. Got a little bit of Argentina, it seems like. It's kind of more like Easter Island style. All right. I'll show this client that I have who wakes me up every morning begging to talk about transits and progressions. And I usually answer the call because he's me. And this is my natal chart. And as I said before, I was born just 10 days before a solar eclipse in the sign of Scorpio. So I've got to go all the way back. I was born October 24th. I literally have to go back 5 months exactly before my birth to see any eclipse, which is a lunar eclipse, and 2 weeks before then, the prenatal solar eclipse, all the way back May 11th, but born October 24th, so this November 3rd is much closer to my nativity. I think we should look at our prenatal and our postnatals, especially when we're born so close to a postnatal, and given the fact, too, that by secondary progression, this happened when I was 10 days old in, transit, so 10 years old by secondary progression, right? Now, this coming eclipse, we just had the lunar eclipse. It was right at my midheaven. And one thing I'm doing a lot of right now in my work and vocation is these talks and, eclipse happenings. And we're going to have an amazing time in Idaho. If you're in the States and you're looking for something to do for the solar eclipse, check it out. It's called Eclipse Within Idaho. If you want to hear more about that, you can find my email at morethan.astrology.com and reach out to me. It's starting up next weekend. 4 days, intentional, sober, awesome, yoga, good food, astrology. Ari Moshe Wolf, it's going to be there as well. So we're going to have a lot of amazing astrology and music in the house too. All right, so the solar eclipse that's coming our way is in my 4th house. And the reason why I wanted to show that is because we're talking about themes of family and legacy and lineage, right? And so this is the chart of my grandfather. And my grandfather just passed away on July 4th, so full Independence Day in this case. And maybe appropriate because my grandfather was a Navy man, as many people his age were fighting in World War II. Just show you that my grandfather, like me, was born pretty soon before a solar eclipse. Now, if I go back to the solar eclipse before his birth, June 8th, 1918, well, that was the last total solar eclipse that came to the States and went sea to shining sea. Right, we had a total solar eclipse in the United States last in 1979, but this is the last one that went coast to coast. So my grandfather was born in this year, and he died in the year that this next happened. I find that to be pretty magical. But again, he was born in November. He was born closer to this annular solar eclipse after his birth. Maybe this map's not happening either. He actually had to pass through Panama Canal to get to where he was going. But see, this prenatal solar eclipse in his case, again, States to Japan, right? And my grandfather was a Navy man who fought in battles all over the place here. And one battle that he fought in, that was supposed to be one of the gnarliest battles, it was a series of battles, was called Guadalcanal. He was in Coral Sea as well. Well, check this out, because again, when we have a postnatal eclipse happening, that means that by progression, we can catch up to that, right? And that happened for my grandfather September 29th, 1942. He was literally, in this place that his prenatal solar eclipse led to from the United States. He was born up here. During this progressed total solar eclipse, annular solar eclipse, that happened, in 1918, but came through in our day-to-year correlation that we utilize in secondary progressions, September 1942. I find that to be fascinating. I'm seeing all sorts of amazing happenings like that with my clients. So this is the day my grandfather died, and I gotta say, I haven't even looked at his progressions at that time. We see progressed Sun met Uranus, and I don't want to get lost going into my grandfather's astrology that I haven't even looked at. The transits did not seem too intense at the time. Here they were, July 4th, 2017. And we have Sun at Jupiter. There's amazing things with Jupiter and full independence, which is what I like to call that transition, in Jupiter square, etc. Moon right at the midheaven. Okay. But this is what's really interesting to me. This is the coming total solar eclipse, right? So the next one since 1918, the year of his birth, sea to shining sea, and it's very strongly configured his Saturn, which is a thing that we've seen a few times, okay? So that doesn't mean, by the way, if you have a solar eclipse at your Saturn, that you're going to die. I think I can share this chart because we've spoken about it publicly, but like Amanda Pua Walsh, who's doing Astrology Hub, she's great, right? She has a 7th house Leo Saturn. And what's she doing? She's being a teacher and assembling 7th house, a lot of one-on-one conversations about this total solar eclipse, right? So amazing. So part of this also is to catch up to, okay, where is the eclipse happening for you? And how can you utilize that, right? What needs to be eclipsed? What's keeping you from utilizing like the highest level of that energy? And what's the new light that's going to come through in the process? All right, I want to speak more about just the magic of these things and how we can utilize them today. But so my grandfather almost made it to his 2nd Chiron return, certainly with an orb at this time too. I want to look at this because this is in this Saros cycle, right? So in the Metonic cycle, 19 years, therefore 1998, 1979, there would have been total solar eclipses right at my grandfather's Saturn as well. And I'm sorry that I can't say what was alive for him at those times. But what I do want to show is this. If I go back to 1999, the last member of this Saros cycle, 145, was August 11th that year. It was square his sun, you see? With Mars conjoined his sun, Saturn opposite his sun. We saw that T-square earlier in the presentation. What if I go back to the previous emanation of this eclipse, which was 1981, right at his Neptune, right? So it's a pretty interesting thing. And this is what I want to get into. I'm going to show two more examples and then we'll wrap up here. I don't really know what to call it yet. But, you know, I mean, obviously Saturn, Neptune, while they're cohabiting in the sign of Leo, we wouldn't call them conjoined in my grandfather's natal chart, you know, besides like from a whole sign point of view. I mean, they're pretty far from orb, right? 18 degrees. But see how the sun is kind of cast to the midpoint of these two planets, and how these eclipses, which move 18 years, 11 days, 8 hours, so therefore about 11 degrees, like connected Neptune in 1981, square the sun in 1999, and then conjoin Saturn in 2017. We're going to look at another example of that. So this woman is currently going through a divorce, and 19 years ago, she was married. Sorry, 18 years ago. So in this Saros cycle, okay, so here's the coming eclipse opposite the moon. I mean, not the strongest configuration, but certainly not south node at moon is very strong, right? But let's go 18 years ago. Let's go back to that 1999, the last time this eclipse family was around, conjoined her Venus. So she got married with the Leo solar eclipse at her Venus. And in this time now, going through divorce with the Leo solar eclipse opposite her her moon. I say Mars because I'm distracted by Mars conjoined Venus. Yeah. So I just want you to see that theme and see this breadth, but it's also leading to something. And we're also getting a clue from the great magician himself, Mercury, where it's going, right? So here's Mercury retrograde conjoined the sun at this time, right? I mean, what's the difference between an Aquarius moon, a Leo Venus, and a Virgo sun, right? And how are they all aligned and configured? That's what's interesting to me, because if I add 18 years to this and we get to 2035, that's when this Saros cycle 145 is next around, and it's pretty strongly configured to her sun. Yeah. So again, I mean, in this natal chart, and now we've got planets out of sign, not only out of orb, but in a way, can you see how this eclipse family is bringing her Venus to her moon to her sun, right? Like this is like some kind of breathing aspect, chord in her soul song, as I like to call it, birth charts, where every planet's a note and the signs are an instrument, the signs are melodies. That this is this chord that's being formed, even though we wouldn't see it by our astrological rules. Somehow this eclipse family is connecting these two, and that it's coming to her sun. It's not the eclipse family she was born into. Neither was this eclipse family of this year, which aligns to my grandfather's Saturn, the eclipse family he was born into, right? But what about when we have these significant alignments? So one more chart example from another client who gave me permission and actually sent over a description of 8199 for her that I'd love to read to you too. Just need to find the chart there and then resume share. Okay, great. And clear this one up. Okay, and here's the full chart. So what am I looking for? I'm looking for, does the eclipse at this time in 2017 have any alignments? Sure, she's born Regulus rising, right? So we're at the very last degrees of her nativity, right? At the you know, in the 12th house, which I love to call the waters of the womb at the birth canal, right? So a rebirth, finishing up in these like hidden places. But so where was it in 1999? Here's that eclipse, opposite Chiron, all right? And I think you can see where I'm going with this. In 1981, conjoined her Uranus, all right? So we're looking at this eclipse family, this Saros cycle 145, again, not the one that she was born into, but somehow linking her ascendant to this Chiron Uranus opposition that so many of us have on our natal chart, now not too strongly configured for her, right? But so what I'll invite you to look for in your chart is what we would call out of orb aspects that align within about 1 decan, or about 110 to 11 degree separation, right? So I had 11 to 10 and I get to 21, right? I had 11 to 22 and I get to 3, which is pretty close to her ascendant, right? So like that one of the woman going through the divorce that we're looking at, we're kind of connecting this Leo, Aquarius, Virgo situation, even though it's out of orb. All right, so let me read to you just what this client wrote. So 1981, an eclipse aligned to Uranus in Leo, all right? So we're thinking royal revolution in the 12th house. And where did I put that? Here. All right. In 1981, I had been an initiate in a Sufi order since age 18. And by the way, in this woman's nativity, a Sagittarius moon separating from a conjunction to Saturn, many other themes that speak of deep spiritual wisdom. My teacher, who was an older woman, maybe Saturn, who had become a surrogate mother as I was estranged from my own. In 1977, under orders from her teacher, she had expelled my partner from the group over a new rule against marijuana use. In 1980, she wanted me to vote for Ronald Reagan, and I had simply said no. By 1981, I had become a human rights activist. In the spring of 81, I wrote her a letter in which I slammed Reagan for his backing of Central American death squads. She gave no reply, but in the summer of 81, she came to the Bay Area and told me that my letter to her meant that I was in a state of darkness. Without discussion, she abruptly said, "I release you," 3 times to break our initiated tie. I remained in the Sufi order for a few months, but I was adrift and saw no way to find another spiritual teacher or a group. I left the spiritual path altogether and stopped meditating for over a decade. So look at that, we have an eclipse at Uranus, and there's this liberation, 12th house, you know, a liberation from, you know, a connection to 12th house themes, spiritual themes of belief. And we're looking at Chiron on the opposite side in Aquarius, you know, the wounds and the great medicine of the revolutionary, right? So here's this happening in 81, and she separates, right? And kind of tunes more into that revolutionary theme. And we saw in 99 now that eclipse is going to be opposite her Aquarius Saturn. So I became a full-time leftist activist and closeted about my relationship with God. I returned to the Sufi path in 94 and became an initiate in a sister order. This infuriated my partner, who, for this and other reasons, left me in 1998 when we turned 40. Okay, so just before this 1999 eclipse opposite Chiron and Aquarius. In 1999, in the midst of deep grief over the breakup and doing intense Sufi practices, my meditation suddenly went silent, and I could not do any mantras or verbal practices. I realized that the meditation I was spontaneously doing was Vipassana. In August of 1999, that's when the eclipse was, I started going to meditation day-longs at a local Theravadin, Buddhist center, then longer retreats, and I became a practicing Buddhist. Okay. So again, what I'm suggesting here is that we look at this Uranus, Chiron, Virgo ascendant, out of orb, but somehow this eclipse family, not the eclipse family of this woman's birth, right? She was born in 1958 and this was 63, but somehow tying those energies together. Okay, so cool. How can we utilize this in our own natal charts? Check out like 11-degree separations that you have in aspects that you would never consider an aspect. See, you could use that moonblink.info. See when the nodes are close to these planets are in these kind of separated aspects, I'll call them. See when eclipses align to one. See if previous in the cycle or the next one in the cycle, you have these alignments. See if there are eclipse families that in this way that's like progressions, right? Metonic like transits, because same degree of the zodiac. These Saros cycles, these families like progressions because they're moving and making these connections over long periods of time, like a breath, like a dance, you see? And see if that's alive for you and see if there's themes, because certainly like if you have an eclipse at your Saturn now, even if it's not the family you're born into, this is significant, right? And I would go back in the 19-year cycles and forward and look at the Metonics at that same degree. But if we look at these 18-year themes, is there something 11 degrees earlier than Saturn in your chart? And so the Saros is bringing that to your Saturn. Or something 22 degrees earlier. So 2 cycles it's taken to bring that to your Saturn, like my grandfather's Neptune to his Saturn over the course of 2 of these Saros, 36 years. All right. And then finally, how can we use that for counseling? Because here's this woman where I'm looking at marriage at the Leo Venus, separation opposite an Aquarius moon. You feel that? Freedom, you know, and then coming to a Virgo sun. So what's the point? And she's Libra rising, by the way. What does the sun want? What is this training? How is it bring? So I say 18 years, it's coming to your sun, right? And let's not get too excited about 18 years, but what is the intent of this thing, right? Or for this woman, the Sikh woman, I'll call her the seeker, what does it mean that she broke away from spiritual traditions, found her way to one, as it's applying now this year to that birth canal from the waters of the womb, the 12th house, into the first, me at her Regulus rising, you know, 1st degree of Virgo. All right. So a strange trip. And thank you so much for being here. Y'all, it's been a nice treat again to have been invited to share amongst amazing company. And it's wonderful to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm glad you could join. And come check me out at morethan.astrology.com. There's an events page. I'm always cruising around and doing live storytellings and sky ceremonies, and hopefully we'll get to meet on Earth someday. And again, thank you, and I will see you in space.
Oh, that was wonderful, Brett. Thank you. Fantastic.
You're very welcome.
Now, I suppose you're tired and we're all tired. Will you take a few questions or not?
Sure, yeah, totally.
Okay, any questions, anyone?
We could look at charts too if anyone wants to go, because I might be tired, but I have good tea. And by the way, I'm drinking tea from 1993 because that's when I turned 18. It was my first Saros return, right? So this is my eclipse tea.
I'll show my chart if anybody wants to look at it, because I'm interested in the Saros cycles. I was trying to figure something out.
Sure.
I never knew how to do it because I wanted to understand the karma. And,
you know what? Why don't, Lauren, you put your data in the chat, and then I'll cast a chart, a nameless chart, as I've been using, as I was advised to. And I just, or what do you want to do about that, Linda? Is that cool?
Yeah, that's cool. Just don't show the birth data anywhere. The thing is, I've got Lauren's chart already drawn up, but do you need something else?
It might be easy if I could run some transits to it and stuff. Yeah. So if it's in my box, that's easier. I cannot not show the birth data, but I cannot show the name, which is what I'll do.
Do you mind if your birth data is shown?
No, I could just give it to him, or do you prefer not to?
No, just put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
Just send it specifically to him.
Okay, got it. Hey, I'm born on October 24th. That's fun. All right, so you're going to be star, 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 which is a really amazing name. And
Star, I love it.
Because I already used star, star, and star, 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 star. All right. So,
okay, I'm turning my audio on so I can laugh because you're very funny.
So I saw a birth city, but not a state. So please add that to the chat.
Illinois.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And
Lauren, what's your ascendant? Just so he can double check that.
It's 20 Aquarius.
Okay.
Okay. This is what our computers see us looking like all the time, right?
Yeah, I guess I should go on here.
Okay, cool. So just do that. I'm just seeing that the last chart example I used, woman was born in Bopard, and I called my grandfather Bappa. That's pretty fun. All right, so.
Oh, it's October 24th.
That your birth date's the 24th?
Yes.
Oh, okay. You wrote 25th in the chat, but we have the same birthday. That's cool. So is this you? Now this is...
Oh, and it's 3:09 p.m. because I think maybe, I don't know, I put 3:09 p.m.
You did do that. I don't know what happened there, but so this is you, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, great. So first let's go over here. You know, this again, folks, this is an amazing thing to play with. So I'm just going to type in 1959. And actually, before we do there, let's look on the chart, right? So one thing I always love to do with folks is to take them out of their frame and check out the scene. What do I mean by that? You know, Scorpio sun, Leo moon, as you know, but born into a Libra moon. You see what I mean by that? Because this is where the seed was planted of the cycle you were born into. Like we get together and do our intention ceremonies in community, whatever, at new moon time, right? So I honor the frame of the film, which is your birth chart, your soul song, you know, but I'm also interested in the scene, right? How does it progress as we move forward in time? And where is it coming from? And when I say where is it coming from, I mean, all the planets have their own cycle, but certainly the moon cycle, usually we start at new moon, right? And so look at this. Well, it seems to me that that moon and sun met pretty close to this node. And what does that mean? That means you were born into a cycle of an eclipse, right? So I could have just cheated and gone over here. And here we see October 2nd, 1959, a total solar eclipse. You know, where was it? Not too far from the place of birth, but certainly connecting the nation of birth and then through Africa. I'm taking you to Ethiopia, Somalia. Have you ever been over to these places in Africa?
No.
Do you have any calling to those cultures or interest?
Hey, this is weird, but I used to be a long distance runner, and once I was running really a long time, and I was going through this high grass, and I totally went into a past lifetime. I was like a giant man running and throwing a spear. I don't know, it was just the weirdest thing. And that it was like really like an out-of-body experience when I was running. And it was like in the past. It was really bizarre. That's the only thing from Africa.
But it's from Africa, and you know that's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, it was Africa.
Amazing. All right. So, I mean, things we can do on this site is then we can look at, okay, I mean, not only were you born in a total eclipse cycle, but it's in a family, right? Now, it's said that like back to like the Babylonian days, folks knew about these tarot cycles. I can't really, if that's true, you know, how were they experiencing these things when like the cycle doesn't come around to the same place for 54 years? And it's either going to be way lower or way higher. I think that's a really cool mystery we need to look at because there's something off in our history. You know, if it's true, they knew more and they had more of either a global connection or some higher tech or just awesome math. So this cycle, it started in 1617, right? And since you came around 77, 95, 2013 was the Tri-Saros. And so again, through Africa, you know, a little bit further south now because it's a North Node eclipse. All right. So that's a fun thing. So, I mean, I would just say, okay, let's look at 77, 95, 2013. We're not going to do all of that now. I mean, this was obviously a pretty amazing time with the Uranus-Pluto square going down, whatever. But the other thing that I'm saying maybe we should look for is just, okay, are there planets separated by 11 degrees, 22 degrees, 33 degrees? So I'll give you an example, and it's not going to play out for some time, but, and I just encourage everyone to play with your own charts in this way. In 2014, in October, there was an eclipse pretty close to your sun. It was not a total eclipse. We saw it here in the States. And I know that because it's my sun sign too, right? I'm at 056.
Oh.
Well, look at how your Jupiter is 33 degrees from your sun, right? One sign would, 30 degrees and then +3, right? So if we look at this family, 2014, and I got to bring in this moon blink again. And again, like I'm going to go basically 54 years into the future, which might be kind of ridiculous, but just to kind of get the idea of this technique across, here's this eclipse. It was visible in the States here. I actually watched it from my backyard. I saw a sunspot with my naked eye. It was pretty amazing. And nobody else should watch eclipses with your naked eye, by the way. Anyway, so this is where that eclipse was visible. And this is not the eclipse family you were born into, but it's an eclipse family that aligned to your sun. So if I look at Saros cycle 153, here is that 2014 eclipse. It came around previously in 1996, 78, 60, right? So about a year after birth, right? And going to come around again in 2032, 11 degrees ahead of there, in 2050, in 2068. So again, I mean, we're looking like really too far into the future, but just to kind of show this technique, here's this eclipse November 24th, 2068. And I just want to confirm that where that's going to be is right at your Jupiter. There it is, right? So maybe a ridiculous example, it'd be better, I think, to go to the past. There's some interesting alignments that where Saturn was in 2014 and where Saturn will be here in 2068. But see how it connects your sun 33 degrees away to your Jupiter. And I could do similar things with other points in your chart, but I think that's probably a good place to stop on that particular share.
Thank you. That's like amazing. I mean, like that you could do all that so quick.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
So Gemini.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, another question? Can you take another question?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
I have plenty of tea.
Saros, yeah. Saros is 145, began, so many hundreds of years ago.
1639.
1639, and it there was a solar eclipse at 13 degrees Capricorn. Yeah.
Yep.
And, well, that's exactly on my Mercury, right? And
Right.
the series ends in when?
2991, I believe.
2991, and it ends in Pisces with a solar eclipse in Pisces.
No, actually, that solar eclipse well, actually, maybe it does. Do you know that to be true?
No, you showed us. You showed us
The one that I was looking at actually was the year 2342, which is like the middle eclipse of this long family from 16.
Was that the Pisces one?
Yeah, that super Pisces chart. Yeah,
What was the
planet party with a fish.
Yeah, what was the ending? The end of that Saros series?
Well, so it's going to go all the way to 2991, but that's the middle one. That's the most total eclipse of all of the family. And see, that's what's kind of it's like its midlife moment for this long, 1300 year happening. It's like the middle of that thing. And that's why I just feel like it's kind of honing us into that energy. And so I think this is something that we can do with these eclipse families, so I'm going to go and look back at 99 and 81 and 63 and 45 and 27 and 1909, like these happenings of the breath of Saros cycle 145. And for you, I mean, it's a really beautiful thing. You say, okay, well, it was conjunct my Mercury. So is this in some way, though I was not around in 1639, that zone of the zodiac is marked by this particular eclipse family? Is this like my Mercury eclipse? Right?
Yeah, I think it is.
I see. You might want to carve this last example out of the thing. Maybe not. I mean, so hopefully people are getting like what the concept is, what the technique is. I mean, is this even a technique? I mean, I'm doing things all the time where I'm just like inventing new stuff. And I'm not going to say it's like official and it's, great astrology yet, because I need to take some time and check it out. But I have found in counseling people, like the woman who's in the divorce now that was married 19 years ago, well, what's going to happen in 19 years when that eclipse is at her sun? Last night I had a consultation for a man who moved from his country of birth to the United States in 1999, and he called me to do an astro relocation reading because he wants to move out of the city where he lives now, right? So 19 years later, that eclipse in 1998, the Metonic, was right on his Saturn, and this year right on his Saturn. So look for these themes with your clients, with friends, and just witnessing, playing with people's charts. 18 years, 19 years, it's just this amazing breath. And see if you can play with that 11-degree thing. It's like maybe new, maybe somebody's talked about this, I don't know, but I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Great, thank you so much, Gemini.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that was fantastic. So I'm just unmuting everybody now. A bit of feedback.
That was excellent, Brett.
Thanks. Thanks for being here, y'all.
Love it. Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys. Thanks, Gemini. Let's hope to see you again. See you soon. See you soon.
Bye-bye.